Hello. We are going to read The Plague today by Todd Olson. And then we're going to work on the quiz. And then, so this is the last book that we're going to read together because I'm going to post the final on Friday and you can finish working on it. And then you have to do your iPad check-in, I think, starting Wednesday. So then I'll give you time to work on that. I'll post the final and then you work on it. It won't be bad. So just, yep. So we're going to go ahead. The Plague. Alright. Introduction. Oh, sorry. Plague started in Asia in the early 1340s. In 1347 it arrived in Europe. The disease first appeared in port towns on the Mediterranean Sea, carried by rats on trade ships from Asia. From there it spread throughout Europe. Introduction. Late in 1847, Italians began to die from a terrible disease. It started with fevers, headaches, weakness, and loss of balance. Then came the ugly swellings in the armpits. Horrible pain struck on the third and fourth day, and arms and legs started twitching. And the fifth day, almost without fail, brought death. By 1348, this plague had spread to France, Germany, and England. Towns and villages all across Europe fell apart. At its height, the plague killed 800 people a day in Paris alone. Parents left their dead children on doorsteps to be carted away. Dogs dug up bodies buried in mass graves. Crops were left rotting in the fields. Sheep and cattle wandered till they dropped from starvation. We know now that the plague was carried by fleas that lived on rats, but at the time no one understood the disease. The best medical minds weren't even close to creating a cure. No one in Europe had any idea what to do, so they had looked for people to blame. In many places, that blame fell on the Jews. Thousands were forced from their homes. Thousands more were killed. But of course, violence did nothing to slow the plague. The so-called Black Death had run its course by 1350. No one knows for sure, but it may have killed 25 million people. If so, between a quarter and a third of the population of Europe was gone. This is a story of an ordinary kid caught in the middle of this disaster. Christophe is a 15-year-old living in the south of France in a town called Narbonne. He's an apprentice or student. He's agreed to help a surgeon do his work. In exchange, the surgeon, his master, is teaching him to be a doctor. Christophe is fictional, but the events that surround him actually happened. Chapter 1. There was a time I didn't think I would live to tell this tale. Even now, 10 years later, I remember the smell of death as though it were just outside my door. When I went to push it away, I remember Master Larocque's voice. He was my master, my teacher, my friend. And I heard him telling me to open my mind, even when it seems too painful. I was 15 when I saw the first victim. It was in the summer of 1348, the brightest of days. I was in the field to the south of town collecting herbs for medicine. I heard the sound of hoofs and looked up to see a rider draped like a blanket over his horse. The horse walked slowly over the dirt toward town. "You there," I called out. "Are you ill?" I was sure he was a trader who had come from the coast. I got no answer and called out again. Still there was silence. I approached the horse and grabbed the reins. As I did, there was a terrible smell. The rider breathed in gasps. He was alive, yet he stank of death. Shaken, I left the day work sitting in the field. I led the horse and her dreadful cargo quickly into Narbonne. It was a market day, and the merchants and craftsmen were in the square selling their wares. People gathered around as I walked through. They were concerned about the men's health, but no one knew what it really was that I was bringing to town. Jean Manon, the butcher's son, ran up to me and laughed. "Christophe, your friend smells like our shop on a hot summer's day. You'd better salt him good before you sit down to dinner." I managed a smile. "He'll be nothing but meat soon if Master Larocque can't fix him." "I saw your master this morning," he said. "I think he's helping someone on Tanner's Lane. That brown mare kicked a girl and broke her leg. Thanks, I said. I turned into Tanner's Lane and found the right home. Master came out when he heard my cries. The rider groaned as we slid him to the ground. His mouth fell open, and I could once again smell death on his breath. Master Larocque opened the man's shirt and gave him air, and we gasped at the sight. Black spots covered his arms. His body appeared to be rotting like an apple. There were great swellings the size of lemons in his armpits. Master Larocque stood up and turned to me. His face was grim. Is it here, Christophe? He said. It? I asked. What is it? What is here? The plague, he said. Last month, you may remember, a trader came to town from Messina with a horrible tale. He claimed people were dying like pigs. But we thought he was crazy. Maybe he wasn't, he said. His eyes looked past me into the air. Maybe he wasn't. Help me drag this poor man inside, will you? A great cloud shut out the sun as we were dragging him off. By the time we reached the door, the skies had opened. A vicious rain poured down around us. I pulled my shirt over my head as though the drops themselves might contain poison. The next day, we left him on a pile of straw at Master Larocque's house. My master told his wife to spend the day outside to be clear of foul air. She refused, bless her soul. She stayed behind to pack herbs and mud onto the patient's swellings. We went out to make our rounds. That evening we returned to a horrible sight. The traded swellings had burst. The black spot had spread across his body. I choked as soon as I breathed the air. Master Larocque splashed vinegar on the body and all around the room to cover the stench. Then he threw rose water on the fire to purify the air. We buried the man that night. I never learned his name. Chapter 2. 2 weeks passed, maybe 3, before I met Joseph. Those weeks the plague had begun to spread its bony fingers around our town. At first people refused to believe that we were in danger. Then 2 Sundays after the trader's death, Charles the tailor stood up suddenly in the middle of church. He was sweating as he staggered toward the altar. His arms waved and twitched wildly. He made it to Father Marcus. Then he fell groaning on the floor. I was too scared to move. I knew right then that whatever had killed the trader had escaped his body. It was in the air. Perhaps it was in the air of the church, the air I was breathing. I gasped and held my breath as long as I could. Master Larocque ran to the tailor's aid, along with the man's family. In a minute I made myself follow. For a time, the rest of the church did not move. Then someone got up and hurried out the door. The rest began to run as well. Many of them covered their mouths as they left. The next day I saw my friend, Jean Manon. Did you see, Jean joked, that tailor looked like a goose fleeing the axe. He was laughing, and yet I had noticed that he'd nearly run over a child trying to get out of the church. But I was writing about Joseph. At first I did not want to go, but Master Larocque made me come along. The streets were empty even though it was midday. Charles had died shortly after that day in church. Since then the master and I had seen more than 20 victims. People were keeping themselves shut inside, thinking they could keep the air pure. I could feel eyes peering out the windows. Master, it is against the law, I said, nervously. To treat the ill, he said, and looked at me with disapproval. Well, to bathe, or eat, or drink with Jews, I said. It is never against God's law, or any law I follow to help people in need. He began to walk faster. But what about the Christian children? Thomas, the merchant's son, told me they kidnapped a child in Avignon, right under the Pope's nose. Then they nailed him to a cross, just like they did to Jesus. Thomas told you that, eh? And did Thomas see it happen? Master was angry now. No, I admitted. He heard it from a trader. The trader had been in Avignon. He heard about it there. People were talking about it. So, he heard about it from someone who heard about it from someone. And that person heard about it from someone else who probably heard about it too. We have a hearing problem in this land. He was shouting now. A band of pigs eating garbage in the street looked up. They started and ran off. Why doesn't anyone believe in seeing? Master continued. Isn't it better to see what is true, not to just talk about what might be? In all of France, I bet you cannot find a single person who has seen a Jew murder a Christian child. But if so, many people have heard about it, I asked. That does not make it true, my master responded. I still do not think we should be going there, I said stubbornly. Kristoff, when your parents brought you to me, I had my doubts that you were ready to learn the art of medicine. Oop, your head was young, but I always thought your heart was good. His head dropped. The first victim of this terrible plague is human kindness. We turned into the Jewish quarter. A mad flutter of wings frightened me. 3 crows disappeared into the dark sky. On the ground lay 3 half-eaten rats, dead in the street. Joseph's house was as big as any in town. It was 2 stories high, made all of stone. His father traveled often to Milan to trade for expensive cloth. He brought it back and sold it to anyone with the money to buy. Christians may talk about the dirty Jews, Master had said on the way over, but they are perfectly willing to trade with them or borrow their money when it suits them. Joseph's mother welcomed us at the door with a warm smile. Around her neck hung a 6-pointed Star of David made of silver. In a darkened room at the back, her husband lay moaning on a bed. Her younger son, Benjamin, lay on a mat nearby. Joseph, who appeared to be around my age, stood quietly in the corner, eyeing me. Everyone in the family wore a small circle of cloth on their robes. The law says they must, so that no Jew can pass as a Christian. Master and I sat by the bed. I pulled the poor man's shirt off. I had seen it a dozen times, and I still had to choke back a gasp. The swellings were already the size of apples. It was as though something evil, something very much alive, had taken over his body. For a moment I could almost feel it escaping through his open mouth into mine. A cold shiver ran up my spine into my neck. Then I made myself concentrate. We washed the swellings, then we packed them with a dressing of clay. We did the same for Benjamin and started to pack our bag. Joseph's mother began to weep quietly. Suddenly Joseph spoke. "You're not going to bleed them?" he asked suspiciously. "No," Master said, "it won't help." "But you must do something to cool the body," Joseph insisted. "Cutting will make them weaker," Master said. "I bled Charles the tailor. A day later he was dead." "What can we do for him?" his mother pleaded. "Please tell me." Master sighed and looked at his feet. "I don't know," he said sadly. "All our learning, all our books, nothing has prepared us for this. But there must be something. I can only tell you what everyone knows. Eat onions, leeks, and garlic. Do not bathe. It opens the pores to let the poisonous air in. Keep southern windows closed. The disease is said to come from the south. Sleep on your side or stomach. It will keep the vapors from entering. My older brother says bleeding cures," Joseph interrupted. "Joseph," said his mother, trying to quiet her son. I could not keep silent any more. "What does your brother know about medicine?" I asked. "My master is the finest surgeon in the south of France." "My brother studies medicine at Montpellier," he said proudly. "At Montpellier?" I tried to hide my surprise. "Yes," he said, annoyed. "Even Jews can learn to practice medicine." "I didn't mean—" "My brother says we are the smartest students there," he said. I just didn't think they would be allowed," I stuttered. "I guess there are some things Christian don't know," he said. I was mad now. We didn't have to come here. We could have— "Kristoff!" Master called out. "Enough. Let us leave these people alone." He picked up our bag, grabbed me tightly by the elbow, and yanked me toward the door. He turned to Joseph's mother from the doorway. He lowered his voice so Joseph could not hear. "I feel I must tell you, Madame Simone. I have treated 24 people so far. No one is still living a week later. I'm sorry." And we went out to the rain. Okay, avoiding plague. During the plague, there were almost as many theories about what caused the disease as there were fleas spreading it. Some people blamed the plague on natural disasters. They said an earthquake had released poisonous gases from the earth. Scholars would try to guess the progress of the plague by studying the color of the sky or the shape of the clouds. There were other theories. Moist air was supposed to carry the disease, so doctors told people to stay inside and keep fires burning. People fled marshy places for dry areas in the hills. You weren't supposed to bathe or exercise. Both activities opened the pores to let the disease in. Bad smelling air was supposed to carry the plague. So when people had to go outside, they often held herbs or flowers to their nose. If you got sick, doctors would pack your sores with mud and herbs, or they bleed you to let the disease out. So what if the plague happened today? Doctors would give their patients antibiotics. In addition, exterminators would be working overtime going after the rats and mice that carried the disease. Okay, chapter 4. Fuck, fuck, fuck. The man next to me was beating his cane against the church pew. Philip Martin was his name. He was a merchant. Light flickered off several bright silver bands around the stick. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The crowd in the church began to quiet down. I say lock them up, yelled Martin in a voice like a crow's. As soon as someone has stripped them, lock them in his home. The church started buzzing again, and he whacked his cane again. My ear was beginning to hurt when a great crash came from the altar. The church had got very quiet. Father Marcus stood over the remains of a vase he had thrown on the floor. Thank you, he said. You cannot cure the plague by shouting it out of town. He went on. The town council has met. They have passed some laws to limit the spread of the disease. From this point forward, all bodies must be buried at least 5 feet underground. The town gate shall remain tightly shut. Only outsiders with essential business here will be allowed in. Any unmarried man and woman living together must marry. Above all, we must follow God's word, and we must pray. Perhaps then he will have mercy on us. Thwack went the cane. What about the Jews? Martin cried out. I looked over. He was as red as a tomato with anger. Another voice from across the church called out, They've poisoned the wells. I heard someone else yell, Run them out of town. Nonsense, my master yelled, jumping out of his seat. I have stood at the bed of at least 10 Jews. They are dying as fast as anyone else. If they had poisoned the wells, would they be giving the water to their children? Suddenly, the red-faced man leaned over me. He lifted his cane and brought it down hard on my master's shoulder. He was muttering something I couldn't understand. Soot sprayed from his mouth onto my lap. He raised the cane again. I stood up fast and caught his arm with both hands. Someone grabbed me and pulled me backwards over the pew. Thwack! I felt the sting of the cane on my arm. I wrestled blindly. In a moment, I pushed my attacker onto the pew. I was shocked to find Jean Manon. He looked at me with rage in his eyes. Suddenly, a sharp tug on my arm sent me flying into the aisle. It was Master LaRoche. He pushed me toward the door. We stepped into the gray rain. It was hot. I was hot with shame. My arm stuck from the madman with a cane. We walked in silence for a minute, then I said simply, I'm going home. Master looked at me. You're free to go at this time, he said. He sounded tired. You won't stop me then? You are nearly a man, Christophe said. You will do what you feel you must. I can't take it anymore. Jean Manon was my friend. When people cannot explain a tragedy, they must have someone to blame, he said. We walked in silence. In a minute we passed Jean Manon's street. His house was not far down, and I turned to look. At the door I saw a strange-looking bundle. Come, my master said. We walked up to Jean Manon's home. The smell from the butcher's shop mingled with another all too familiar smell. I knew right away what I would find. I did not want to look. I did not want to breathe. If I ran fast enough, I thought, maybe I could outrun it. Maybe I could find some place on earth that was free from this black death. Maybe I could stay alive. Master pushed me gently forward. At the door lay a body, covered in a small blanket. I walked closer and made myself look. It was Jean's little sister, Marie. She just lay there, waiting for the grave digger to carry her off. There would be no priest and no funeral. She might as well have been a rat. Good. The next morning a knock came at the door. I opened it and found Joseph looking at me like a wounded deer. "Is your master at home?" he asked. "What do you want with him?" I stood blocking the doorway. I need to see him." "You should not be here," I said. "You'll put us all in danger." He did not move. "Christophe!" Master Laroche came up behind me. "Who is it?" I stepped aside. They looked in each other's eyes for a moment, and then Master said quietly, "Your father and brother?" "And my mother as well," Joseph said, wincing just slightly. "You are alone now?" Master asked. "Yes." "Well, come in." Joseph stood for a moment. He looked at me as though I were a guard dog. "Come in," Master repeated. Joseph slid past me into the house. They sat on wooden chairs in the front room. I stood in the corner, sullen. For some time Master asked questions. Joseph nodded or shook his head in response. All the while he hung his chin on his chest. He would not look up. Was his family properly buried? Yes. Did a rabbi attend them? Yes. Did he have more family in town? No. Did he have enough food? No. Money? No. Did he have a place to go? No. All of a sudden he lifted his head. He set his eyes on Master Laroche. "I want to learn to cure people of this disease," he said. Master looked at him with sad eyes. "I'm afraid I can't teach you that," he said. "I would do better as a priest. Then at least I could comfort them." "My brother sent word the other day," Joseph said. "They are performing autopsies at Montpellier." "The Pope is allowing it?" Master asked. "Perhaps you will learn something after all. But you should study there, not here. Go where reason is stronger than superstition." "I am young," he said. "They won't let me in." "Well, I suppose Christophe here is planning to leave us," Master said. "I'm going to need help." "You cannot!" Master glared at me. Still I went on. "Christians will not want a Jew to treat them." "Then it will be their loss," he said. "But you will put yourself in danger," I said. "You saw what happened at church." "Everyone is in danger now," Master said. "What does it matter if I add to it by doing some good?" I looked at Joseph. Once again his head was bowed. He would not look at me. I pictured his mother weeping over his father's bed, and in a second I saw my own mother's face in hers. The air suddenly felt hot, close and hot. I walked to the door, I pushed it open, and ran out into the street. Okay, I'm going to pause here, and then I'm going to do it in two.